Hello and welcome back to our expert series. We are in week 2 and today we have one of our favorite brands, honestly, to introduce to you guys. This is LEVO. And these are some of the things that we will use with the LEVO. But to kick things off, I am joined by a familiar face you might recognize, my sister Sydney and co-founder here at Restart. Sydney is also a LEVO ambassador, and she is a whiz in the kitchen, and for many years has been using LEVO to essentially make herbal infusions that you can bake with and incorporate into infused dishes and food. So if you are someone who is curious to learn how to maybe make your own cannabis extractions, maybe you are looking to make your own infused edibles, infused meals, infused dishes at home, I think that LEVO is the right tool for you. And we're going to walk through that today with Sydney. So welcome, Sydney.
Yay, thank you. When you first started, I thought you were going to be like, we have our favorite person here, not brand, so that's okay. I'll let it slide. But I'm super excited to be here. Obviously, like Shayda said, I have just become a LEVO ambassador, so I am much more familiar now with the brand than I was maybe even a couple of years ago, getting to try different recipes, infuse different kinds of oils, create new things in the kitchen. So I'm excited to talk through the different products they offer, and hopefully I do a good job for LEVO because it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, so to kind of kick off, I guess we have some stuff on the table that we're going to get to throughout the duration of this video. But to kind of move some things out of the way, I want to start with just examining these two machines that we have here. So how do I make some space so you guys can see? So Sydney, what are these things that we're looking at?
Yes, so we have two LEVO machines here. This one on Shayda's side is going to be a LEVO 2 machine. Over here, the orange on my side is a LEVO C. The main difference is really just the size of the capsule that you can infuse your oils in. Also, how much flour you can use to infuse. So if you're doing large batches and you want to make things timed out and last a little bit longer, you can make huge batches in the LEVO C. This is, I would say, the LEVO 2 over here would be for more a beginner, someone who's just testing something out, who has something very simple to go through and start infusing their own things. But that's the main difference between these two machines. I personally love them both. I honestly lean into the LEVO 2 a little bit more sometimes just because it's smaller, it's easier to clean up, and I'm most familiar with that machine.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that comes to me the most is these are such beautiful, like Keurig, essentially,
so
like
nice.
they're tabletop extraction machines.
I leave mine on my tabletop all the time. I have the one in Chrome, their new release, and I leave
really
it,
nice.
and it just matches all my other appliances.
Yeah, so like you said, these are both kind of in that category of being something that you can incorporate into your love for cannabis, your love for cooking. I do personally love my LEVO 2 machine. I think that it is a little bit easier when I am making maybe smaller batches or like a single or a couple types of, particular recipes versus the LEVO C is something that if I'm doing, a larger batch, maybe making a holiday infusion.
We also, too, have used this machine for a few events we've done in town.
That's right.
So last year we did an event with Salvation Pizza, and we helped them with their recipe development infusion and used this little guy right here to help us infuse it.
Yeah, so they're very powerful devices. Now, I guess let's kind of walk through some of the mechanics of it. Like, what is LEVO doing exactly?
Yes.
What is happening? And I think it's fair to also highlight, we are a cannabis brand, and so we use LEVO for cannabis extractions. However, LEVO is a great infuser for any herbs. So I think in that extension to being able to make, an infused rosemary olive oil. You can take other herbs.
Honey, ginger honey.
Yeah, anything
like
that's
that.
a fat, right? So we'll walk through some of those examples, but just kind of, high level wanting to understand how do these devices function specifically as it relates to cannabis, because I think that's what you guys care the most about. But these devices really do have a lot of other cool applications beyond just cannabis infusion, which is important to highlight, right? Because there's kind of multi-step process when you're actually using cannabis versus using other herbs. Y'all may be familiar with the term decarboxylation, but cannabis does need to be decarboxylated before it can actually be infused. So rather than putting, your oil with rosemary and letting it infuse thanks to heat and time, you're going to actually have a step prior to that with cannabis because you're going to have to
Yes.
decarboxylate it.
Yeah, so with cannabis, if you're familiar at all, what people typically do is use their ovens and stovetops to first decarboxylate their herb, their cannabis. And so that process, essentially what it means is you're activating the cannabinoid in that flower before infusing it into your oil, which only enhances your oil that much more. So on the LEVO machine, like I said, these are not only mini ovens, but also stovetops. It's an all-in-one experience. And on each of the machines, as Shayda's turning them on, we'll use the LEVO 2 as the example here. The LEVO 2 has 3 settings, okay? So on this side over here, you have a dry and activate. You probably can't see it, but an infuse as well. So let's say you have a farm. You have bud growing. Fresh picking that bud off your farm, you'd want to first dry or cure it before you even activate it. So there's a 3-step process, but let's say you're buying it from a store like Restart. It comes already in a little package that is already cured, but you do need to activate this bud. So in order to turn it into THC butter or infusing certain oils, you want to use the activation, which is also the decarboxylation stage. In that stage, there are different temperatures for decarboxylating different cannabinoids. So if you want to get into like the nitty gritty, get really particular with your oils, CBD's infused or their decarboxylation stage is about 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 149 degrees Celsius. I think on this LEVO 2, if I'm not mistaken, you can change between Fahrenheit and Celsius too. So no matter where you are in the world, you can immediately go to where that measurement is. Now, right now it is set on the activate stage. You can change the time as well, so increasing or decreasing it, and increase or decrease that temperature on the right-hand side. For THC, the difference in the decarboxylation stage is a slightly lower temperature. THC is just slightly less stable than CBD. So it's 278 degrees Fahrenheit and then 137 degrees Celsius. So again, you can decarboxylate, you can activate any herbs you want. We're obviously talking about cannabis over here, but if you want to activate CBN, CBG, CBC, other cannabinoids in your plant that are higher or lower in certain cannabinoids, you can use that and really get specific with what you're trying to get out of your oil and out of your infusion, which is really great. After the decarboxylation stage is now the infusion process. And that, I mean, LEVO has a great book. Let me show you this here. So this is Inspired Infusions, Elevated Edibles. This is just one of their cookbooks, but in here they also go into great detail on different temperatures, different infusion cycles. We're using coconut oil versus olive oil versus butter. So different fats also have different stages and different temperatures that you want to use. So having these tools that LEVO provides is really, really helpful and useful, especially for beginners. But as you go through the process, if you want to search online, you will have to kind of go through an elimination process and figure out what temperature is best for you and what you like out of your infusion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's what I really love about the LEVO devices versus perhaps other extraction/infusion devices. Sometimes what I find is they're not actually able to let you customize too much, and which is maybe helpful for those beginners who just want it kind of pre-baked for them. But I think when you really want to fine tune and have something that you can work with and like exactly play with different cannabinoids, like you were saying. I mean, there's so much, whether you're using olive oil, you're using butter, you know, we've got some of these examples today, coconut oil, like those all have different properties to them. And so the more that you can understand both by trial and error, so playing around with different infusions, as well as, to Sydney's point, using the resources, whether it's the LEVO book. I know LEVO's website also has a lot of really great recipes, videos, tutorials. Their ambassador program is really robust, and so there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with LEVO. So what I like about it is it's very easy for a first timer.
Oh yeah.
It's also very robust for those of us who want to explore a little bit and take to the next level. Exactly. So a really great product to kind of walk through different options with.
Totally. Yeah, and like going back to your point too on even there's the different fats. So butter versus olive oil, right now we're at room temperature. Our olive oil is a liquid and our butter is a solid at room temp. So there's different fats, there's milk solids in this, there aren't milk solids in that. So understanding your ingredients beyond the cannabis itself will give you a better product. And again, all of that is outlined in the LEVO cookbooks, which if you do anything, make sure you get those cookbooks or even just do some research online to make sure. I think the biggest thing, just like kind of pivoting a little bit, is when people make infused edibles, the biggest concern is it going to work? am I actually going to feel anything from this? And so if you're really specific with the temperatures, if you do your research prior to it, you're going to get a much better outcome from using it.
Kind of on that vein though, let's talk a little bit about, because cannabis, right? If I'm infusing rosemary into olive oil or butter, maybe there is a certain amount of rosemary sticks that I need to put in the infusion so that it absorbs. Cannabis though, when you're dealing with dosing, you really want to make sure that you're understanding the math. So if you could talk about that a little bit, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Absolutely. So if you've ever gone to the store, if you're familiar with flower, maybe if they're a good store, they're going to tell you the percents of THC, CBD, of those two main cannabinoids, at least in your bud. From there, you can do a little bit of math. I actually have a video on my personal YouTube that you can go follow along, where it tells you if you have a 10% THC bud, if you break it down and use 4 grams for your 1 cup infusion, you can figure out actually how much THC is per tablespoon per cup. And obviously it's very, very important, especially on the cannabis side, like Shayda said, when you're infusing, how much oil to actually use, because if you overdo it, if you have no idea, you could eat a cookie and it could be 5 milligrams or it could be 50 milligrams, and those are 2 very different experiences.
Well, too, going into the different concentrations, right? A little, I think, ends up going a long way. Like, you can actually get a significant amount of cannabinoids when you are extracting what? Like, I think in the LEVO 2, it recommends like up to an eighth, or which is 3.5 grams, or up to 4 grams is kind of like its max capacity. Obviously, in the LEVO C, this chamber is going to hold a little bit more. So if you want to pull that out and kind of show everybody what that experience is like. So this is what you're going to essentially be filling. And so this just is a larger chamber to be able to hold more bud.
Much more bud.
The best way that I've been taught to do it is you don't want to just like put your bud in there loosey-goosey.
Directly. Definitely not.
You want to grind it.
You want to grind it for sure. So you want to make sure the more surface area you can create and more areas for the oil or whatever medium you're using to penetrate through all of the leaves of your bud, you're going to get a stronger, more accurate measurement of how much THC or CBD is in your oil, versus let's say you put a giant nug in, let's open this up just to show the people. You put a couple giant nugs, just pop them in your LEVO compartment right here.
Which I've done before. Like, it's not effective. It's just, I think when you are wanting to really maximize it, same way when I'm smoking cannabis. Like, if I'm in a pinch, I will literally pinch some bud off and rub it in my fingers and kind of try to make it, ground up.
Yeah.
But I'm not maximizing the surface area, and so I might be going through more bud faster.
Torching the outside versus actually getting all of it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not that you can't do that. It's just better practice to invest in a grinder. There's a lot of really great grinders in the marketplace. Essentially, you have a top chamber where you're going to be loading your bud in.
She's been used.
She's been used. You twist it essentially like a grinder. And then in the next chamber, it is ground up flour. And so the flour is what we then recommend putting directly into the chamber to go into the infusion. So
yeah, and on that note too, I know LEVO states it in their recipe book as well, or even on their website if you find it, but I believe it's 1 cup per 4 grams is a good standard practice. So if you're using a cup of oil, try to get at least 4 grams of your bud to make sure the infusion is potent. I personally really like a more concentrated oil. If I'm using in baking or cooking, I'll do, if let's say the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons, I'll put a tablespoon of my infused oil and then cut it with a tablespoon of the regular uninfused version.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a little bit of maybe the learning curve, is trying to figure out, okay, how much bud, and not necessarily quantity, right? Using, I think, an 3.5 to 4 grams as like a standard, but what is the percentage of that hemp flower, which would be higher in CBD, versus what is the percentage of, marijuana or just traditional cannabis, higher in THC. Those THC and CBD, those cannabinoids vary strain to strain, cultivar to cultivar, and so you want to take that number, whatever the percentage is, if it's 23% THC, do the math to understand
I'm not going to do it on
how
camera.
much oil or fat. So that's part of it too. So cannabis is fat soluble, so that's why you see mostly exclusively infusions into something fatty. So anything that's really fatty. So you mentioned honey. Honey's a really great one. We've used coconut oil before, butter, olive oil. So there's really a lot of options when it comes to kind of like sweet or savory.
Yep.
But it's just understanding what is that THC or CBD or cannabinoid preference at that percentage, and then understanding how much of the fat you're using and trying to do the math from there. The reality, though, is you are ultimately trying to dose something to consume, right? So if it's honey, is it per tablespoon? If it's butter, is it per tab of butter? Per, eighth cup of oil? And so trying to understand a little bit of what that math is gets you closer to understanding what you're ultimately consuming. So whether you're consuming individually, you may or may not care to know how much cannabinoids you're getting. But I think with things like the LEVO C, where it's a little bit more of an industrial size model, just education is power, as we like to say. And so being able to feel empowered with understanding how these devices work, how cannabis works, I would say, I'm not very science confident. And so sometimes doing the math, I'm a little bit like, fingers crossed, I hope this works. So, it's just, the reality is you're making essentially something that you're going to consume, edibles. There's a whole journey of consuming cannabis through your food. And if you're new to our channel, we encourage you to go visit some of our other videos where we explore those more in depth. But again, I really love these because, like, fun fact for us as a family, we have been super, fortunate to have LEVOs in our lives for the past, 5 or 6 years. And so as such, I feel like with every holiday that comes up, whether it's a birthday, whether it's Thanksgiving, just a special occasion.
Always an infused cake.
Somebody's always infusing a cake. And so a quick little story to kind of, create a example for you guys. Sydney, to her point, she's usually diluting that recipe. So if the recipe is saying, a half a cup of oil, she might use a quarter of the cannabis infused oil and a quarter of traditional oil so that she can control that ratio. So we had a storm a couple of years ago and Sydney was out of town and I was feeling in my,
I had some leftover infused oil.
Great British baking, era, and Sydney had traditionally, been making us cakes with her extraction, her infusions. And
that were not super strong. They
weren't super
microdosing.
Strong. Sydney was more of a microdose, and I'm a little bit more of a macrodose kind of gal. And so I had no idea that Sydney was cutting her recipes with both infused and uninfused oil. And so I just went full send. I was like, recipe says half a cup. I'm putting half a cup of the infusion. And I think after the fact, obviously retroactively, like as I'm peaking for my high, I'm realizing I'm like trying to do the math. I'm calling Sydney. I'm like, wait, I use this much in the recipe and you're telling me that you put this much in flour wise to oil ratio. We calculated, I think that the cookies were like 12 to 15 milligrams of THC a piece, and I had probably like 10 cookies.
It was a lot of THC.
So it was a lot. And I'm the type of person that, not that was pleasant by any means to overconsume, but I'm sharing it because it's the reality. Like maybe you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, that was me literally this week. I was making something and didn't really understand the math and ate too many of the, cookies, brownies, insert whatever, and had an experience. So obviously our goal is to help kind of inform you, educate you, make sure you feel comfortable and kind of have access to different resources and tools. With that said, I obviously am very capable of understanding some of these things.
Yeah,
so
there was some miscommunication.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us. So when you're dealing with these products, it's best just to, what is the saying? It's like, measure twice, cut once. Measure three times.
3 times when it comes to cannabis. Absolutely.
Eat
and then
one.
text your sister before using the oil to infuse.
Yeah.
But on that note too, I think just like creating your own recipes in general at home has become really, really popular. Home baking, home cooking. I think cooking at home really empowers you. We both love to live a healthy lifestyle. And being able to make our own infused treats that don't have the added ingredients, if you will, that are on the market, that make them shelf stable, that make them last. It's really fun to experiment with those recipes and also just create our own treats at home. So like Shayda said too, she's making her own butter. This is her example because we were at her house filming today. But LEVO also comes, you can buy these, what do you call them, like butter molds,
They're molds,
essentially.
yeah.
These are molds that you can do actual sticks of butter, and then on them there are indents, so you can precisely measure and cut each knob of butter. They also have ones for gummy infusions, circulars, gummy bears, whatever it may be. So they come with really fun accessories that if you want to, you know, film for the internet, if you just want to be precise with your measurements, you can have them at your disposal. Some recipes coming up too with LEVO that I'm working on are some protein puppy chow. I'm working on like a sweet potato brownie. So again, taking traditional recipes or maybe your traditional recipes and then turning them on its head and adding some cannabis to it because they're things that you maybe already enjoy or you want to experiment with, and you're just making cannabis more accessible, more fun for everybody.
Yeah, I love that point because I think so much of like our traditional experience with cannabis is like through a gummy. And like you said, LEVO has great molds. There's so many great molds on the internet. Essentially, the way this works is this is going to heat it up, so it's going to be like a liquid, so like the butter doesn't come out hard, you know, it's going to come out as a liquid. And if I can just kind of pick up my wad of infused butter, yep, it smells infused. This hardened because I put it in the fridge, right? And so being able to play around with different form factors is really fun. And to your point, being able to incorporate it into non-traditional things. So for like the longest time, I was really focused on essentially like sweet infusions. So I was using coconut oil or honey because I wanted to make baked goods. I wanted to put it in cakes. I wanted to make cookies. I wanted to make brownies. Now I feel like I'm getting into a little more of like the savory side. So being able to use it in oils. Butter is a great universal. I mean, oil too, right? But being able to make something sweet or savory, depending on kind of what the vibe is. And I'm no longer relegated to eating a gummy. I can do some of the deduction math based on, you know, how much cannabis I put into the butter and how much butter I use, that I can kind of pre-dose myself, whether it's like a tab or just like a little scrape of butter. And so being able to, you know, maybe zhuzh up my eggs in the morning.
Make some toast.
Yeah, exactly. Like make some non-traditional products, edibles, products maybe not the right word, but like things that you can enjoy eating and incorporate into your everyday life and routine, versus just like the traditional standard of like, I gotta make a gummy, I gotta make like a cookie. There's like so much, like even in the LEVO cookbook, there's so many fun recipes.
Oh my gosh, and
like everything you said, I'm like, ooh, like.
I know.
But yours are sweet, but I'm excited for you to...
I mean, I love sweet stuff, so that's where I naturally gravitate towards, but I'm excited to start also using it in more savory dishes. Something I did want to touch on, just to kind of backtrack and talk about the pods in here that help with separate your flour in an oil. So with traditional decarboxylating, infusing, you put your bud in an oven and then you do it on a stovetop, whatever it may be. Sometimes it can get a little bit messy. And what I love too about the LEVO, as I'm like looking at your butter, because it looks like butter, not like there's little pieces of flour in it, the bud stays in the pod. So as long as you're not like grinding it up so super fine, all of your bud is going to stay in the pod. You'll naturally start to see the color of your oil change a little bit, but it makes for a really easy cleanup process, which I think is super important to mention, because a lot of times when people make infusions at home, they're really turned off by the smell, the cleanup. There's just so many steps to it. When you're able to do it all in one machine very easily, it makes it much more accessible. And the cleanup, which is my least favorite part of anything, but it makes it a lot easier with LEVO.
No, 100%. I mean, just to kind of walk through this a little bit, you know, so this is kind of your top chamber. This is essentially like where you're going to load in your, we are missing, I need to find it. If you can tell, I really love my LEVO and I've been using it more frequently lately. But essentially this holder that's going to hold the bud is going to sit inside here. And so when you're going through the different process, I will say it's not like, you know, you put the bud in, you put your oil in, and like out comes your product. It does go on a cycle, so it can take anywhere from like 30 minutes to actually activate that bud. So you're going to decarboxylate it. It can take upwards of like 2.5, 3 hours to infuse it into the actual fat. And so it's just something that, yes, like if you're anticipating on, let's say, baking a cake tonight, this might not be, like pre-planned. Like it's not going to be something super quick. And that's just because the reality is you're dealing with a plant and it has to go through its process to, one, activate so that it can be ready to be infused. And then two, the infusion is kind of like slow and low. Like you want to just be able to get it actually to soak in there. So that's something that I really do love about the LEVO products. They're very intuitive. These screens are very descriptive. So they, you know, kind of let you know, hey, you're, you know, 30 minutes into the cycle. You've got an hour and a half left to go. From there, once it is done, essentially, kind of, I guess maybe backing up just a tidge, everything happens in this container, right?
Yes.
So I am able to activate. As soon as the activation process is done, I just literally, ploop, go to the next stage, and then I start that to infuse. Of course, once I pour in my oil or butter, you don't want the oil or butter in there to be in there while you're activating, so there's certainly some steps to it. But once it's done, there is this button right here, and essentially this is going to open a chamber in the bottom, and it's going to allow you, whatever cup you have, whatever container you have, to essentially dispense the oil or the butter into whatever container you want to have.
Super convenient.
In the LEVO C, you'll see it in there. It's going to be more of like a pour spout, so you're going to be able to pour out, whatever it is that you've infused in there. But it is really a straightforward, really sleek, really effective way of doing it. I think there's a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding when it comes to cannabis, and I would say this conversation is like certainly a baseline, the way that I always like to express it as well. Cannabis is such a dynamic plant, and so depending on your preferences, your experience, again, the types of oils and fats you're using, there are standard temperatures and standard settings in here, which are a great baseline, again, for just like plugging and playing, but being able to really play around certain temperatures, like different cannabinoids burn at different temperatures. So like in a separate conversation with herb vaporizing, you also are playing around with temperatures. You're playing around with what temperature am I going to burn this cannabinoid at to get the best effect and the best result. So that same mindset applying to baking. Again, it can be very straightforward, but if you really want to like nerd out and get into some of the specific temperatures, specific, fats that you're using, timing, I think these devices are perfectly poised to help, consumers have a really fun relationship to cannabis in that regard.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of really good resources too. I know LEVO has a blog post. They have a lot of other affiliates like me who are creating recipes. But there's great fun resources, again, just normalizing the conversation around it. Something too about these machines, because you touched on maybe having to leave the machine on for a couple hours. If you're not comfortable leaving the machine on, you need to go run errands. They do have an app that you can also maybe pause the machine or just look at what stage in the process you're at. Again, just for ease of mind, the technology around it is honestly like ahead of its time, I feel like. LEVO's been around for a lot of years, and we've been using it for so many years, but it's something that you can have on your countertop. It's very intuitive, it has different heat settings, and it's very well thought out as a product, which is why even over other infusion machines that we've used, this is the one that we go back to again and again.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is just a very nice put together kit for someone to be able to, start exploring their own herbal infusions, if you will.
Absolutely.
But what's one of you mentioned two of the recipes you're working on. What's maybe like some other creative ideas that you have to give some people some inspiration?
I would say something I haven't actually infused yet is honey. I always gravitate towards oils, butters, just because to me those are super universal, but even honey, adding it to tea or coffee, I think that could be a really interesting addition that's very, very simple. Something else, maybe even the realm of a topical. So you're using olive oil, you can use coconut oil. That could be your base for creating your own topical at home. Those topicals require more steps, beeswax, other ingredients, but the baseline again is, creating something not just ingestible, but even topical application.
And that's a great point. I didn't even think about, what else you could make once you have that decarboxylated flour.
Your options are endless.
Yeah, so like whether you want to just decarboxylate it, you want to take a step further to infuse it into something, it's really cool to like think through that, what LEVO can help you kind of empower to do.
Absolutely.
But I think that's all we've got for our LEVO Expert Series. We are going to be doing a very fun giveaway over on our social media at Restart CBD, and you can find out more details in the description below. We definitely encourage you to come visit us over on Instagram. We have a lot more real-time event content. Yes, we are based in Austin, Texas, but we are doing a lot of really fun, especially with this series. This expert series is running every Thursday for the next couple of weeks, going into, of course, April, going into 420. And so we're really excited to bring you guys just some of the brands that we obviously love and sell and partner with.
And just highlight them.
And yeah, and just like our whole goal is to help inform and educate you guys with different ways that you can interact with cannabis. and maybe learn some new things along the way. But Sydney, I know that you do have a special code
I do.
as an ambassador. So if you're curious, if we made your curiosity piqued of wanting to procure a LEVO for yourself, one of these, could be yours if you want to head to LEVO's website, and then you can use Sydney's code, which we will also link in the description. But
Yep. It's code Sydney Torabi, my first and last name. It'll essentially get you, I believe, 20% off, $20. It's one of the two. Don't quote me on that, but you can go to the website, and it's good for your first purchase at anything at LEVO. So have at it. If you have questions, obviously, you can DM us on Instagram. You can then DM me personally at Spin City or Restart CBD. Either one totally works for me, and I would be happy to answer your questions. And I just am excited to be a part of the LEVO team now, to be able to highlight this brand that we've been using personally for years, to do it at a company that I've also been a part of for 6 years. So it's very, very full circle. Full circle.
yeah, thank you so much, Sydney, and we can't wait to see what you guys make with your LEVO devices. If you have a LEVO device, let us know which one in the comments below, and stay tuned for next week when we come back with our next live expert series video. Thanks, bye y'all.
Bye.